Hello everyone, my name is Immo Landwerth, and today we are doing our .NET Community Stand-Up where we talk about System Command Line. So the announcement said that John Sequeira will be with us. Doesn't seem like he can make it, but I found some really great replacement or alternative or fill-in or whatever you want to call yourself, stunt double.
Digging yourself a hole there.
You can always say you're a crash test dummy. That always works. There's always alternatives.
Yeah, we'll do this one live, as they say.
Yeah. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Chet Husk. It's my first time on the show. I'm excited to show some stuff off. I'm a product manager for the .NET SDK and MS Build and the .NET templating engine. But I've also been heavily involved in the development and sort of evolution of the System Command Line API.
That's awesome. So yeah, let's quickly talk about System Command Line in general. So the first question we're getting, I think, will be, we can probably answer relatively quickly. So this thing is not part of the .NET platform, right? But we intend to ship, I think, a stable version more or less together with 7.0. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're actively pushing towards GA. Now, there are some milestones that have to happen before that can happen, right? Those of you who are attentive viewers may have seen the API review a couple weeks ago, and then the session that Immo and John did, was it just last Monday, where Immo worked through using System Command Line on a tool of his own. These are all like valuable and useful checkpoints, and each time we do them, we get good feedback. Beta 4 should be coming very soon, taking into account some of the feedback from those sessions. So look for that to come out very soon. I believe John is working on release notes and polishing that sort of thing at the current moment. So keep an eye out for it. We are pushing towards GA. We want it as much as y'all do.
That makes sense. So then maybe let's just jump into some demos so people can get a quick overview of what it does.
Yeah. So what I've got on my screen right now is where I live for most of my day-to-day. I breathe the .NET CLI. And so one of the major benefits that we get out of System Command Line, because .NET CLI was one of the early adopters of this, is really awesome help. So in my job specifically, I do a lot of working with individual customers that have problems with their build or a certain template that they used or something like that. And so I very often am creating new sets of templates or new projects or new relationships between them. And sometimes that can get a little confusing when you have tons of different template options to use. So we benefit a lot on the command line from the sort of rich autocomplete experience that System Command Line gives us. So what you're seeing right now is tab-based autocompletion in PowerShell for all of the templates I have installed on my system. And so if a user comes up to the SDK repo and says, I was trying to make a Blazor server app and I couldn't like set the correct auth that I wanted, then I can quickly sort of discover their particular configuration here, and I can, replicate their environment very quickly, sort of guided through tab completion all along the way. So that's super helpful. I guess we get to see what happens when you have commas and spaces in names. But another thing that's often helpful is, you embed some gestures working day to day on the command line, some particular use cases that you're trying to do, adding packages. Well, sometimes you forget, is it a package in this case? Is it a reference? Does add come first? What? So we get all of this really rich, automatically generated help output from System Command Line. And from our perspective as like Microsoft employees shipping a product, it includes localization deep in it, like as a core component. So that is something we get the benefit of basically for free. That is a huge benefit, like not having to manually code these helps, not having to manually code completion, not having to manually code localization lookups means that the time we do spend on the CLI is like force multiplied. So we really enjoy getting this kind of thing for free. And when we do need to customize it explicitly, for example, you can see that the default value here includes the current directory for the project argument here. The extensibility of System Command Line makes that very easy for us to do. So I see a couple of questions in chat that I'd like to just dip out for a second to hit. Will it be .NET 7 only? The answer is no. I'm currently on 7 previews just because I like to run bleeding edge and I kind of have to debug issues as we are developing the SDK. But the library itself, I believe, is a net standard library. So you can pull it down into Net 6.0 applications, I believe even Net 5.0 applications. So just go to NuGet.org and search for System Command Line there, and the fancy new target framework support that the NuGet team has added will let you know where you can use it. So low-key, that's one of the best things that's happened recently. I love that new display. There was also a question in chat from Melissa. I apologize if I didn't say that correctly, but you wanted to know how I set up my command line console like that. This is oh my posh, I believe, is what I've got going on now. We can probably find a link to that once I'm done blabbing and put it in chat, but it's a really easy to use PowerShell customization framework. And this is just one of the built-in themes. There's a whole bunch that you can, yeah, there it is. Oh my posh.
I think it's get posh theme, I think, or something like this, and it dumps all the themes that are available, I believe. No, I think it's literally just a PowerShell applet get dash posh theme, I think.
Oh, I see. Oh, there it is, Posh Themes. Yeah, so it comes with a whole bunch of different options. Oof, sorry, that was probably
Yeah, there's a lot
not
of them.
ideal for folks in chat there. Apologize for that fast scrolling text. But it comes with a whole bunch of themes built in that you can quickly choose. And the entire thing is customizable. It's just made up of individual segments. So you can see that for my personal theme, I've got my current working directory and then the version of the .NET SDK that I'm currently using, right? So very fun stuff.
Yeah, I believe Scott Hanselman has a blog post like, how to get a fancy terminal, I think, where he goes through all the different things like, PowerShell, profiles, I think which terminal to use, how to set up the profiles in the terminal, how to get proper fonts, because some of the stuff requires special fonts to get the icons and all that stuff to work.
Yep.
So but yeah, most of us are doing this because, we live in command prompts these days. So
Yeah.
might
And
as well
as a
make it
quick
nice.
note, like the display that you're seeing here, where all of the options are multi-columnar, this is a PowerShell shell that I'm in, but this has got a different completion format called menu complete. So this I like a lot more than the default completion, which is just one giant column. So
Yeah,
be
that's awesome.
be informed about your shells, folks. Yeah, so that was a bit of a digression, but those are sort of the day-to-day, the benefits we get from System Command Line in the .NET CLI. There's a whole bunch of other stuff too that we could maybe talk about. We are able to implement cross-cutting functionality across all of our different commands in a uniform way due to the middleware model, for example. So execution timing is one thing that we do in this way. Regardless of the command that you invoke, we get consistent start and end times through a middleware process, right? So
I think you need to show some code now.
I need to show some code. All right, so this is where things are going to get sort of interesting. So if I stop my screen, share a new screen. All right, so here's a VS Code window. Do you see that, Immo?
Hold on. Oh, I need to click on it. Here we go.
All right, so I guess I'll make it slightly bigger and see if we can work on the formatting here. But this is sort of like a super basic hello world kind of thing.
Could you hide the sidebar and zoom in a little bit?
Yes, I could. Doop. All right, so
Awesome.
this is a super basic application, a console app that has errors. All
You may need to
right.
restore.
I may need to, but I also might have incorrect syntax because I think
You have another one with top level statements apparently.
Yeah, well, this is just I'm running the latest version of the template, which, some people don't like top level statements all the time. The new 60300 release of the .NET SDK gives you back the option to not have top level statements. So if that is your preference, you have it back again. Okay, so let me just grab all this stuff, put it back in here, format that back, and return that. And let's see.
I think you may have returned void. I think in your case, you probably need to change it to indoor. Yeah, that also works.
There we go.
I think you're in the wrong namespace and the wrong folder.
I think you may be right. Oh yeah, this is my generated thing that I wrote. Let's get rid of that guy that I just deleted. And let's try again.
I think now you have an RM in the middle, right after public class program. Yeah, here we go.
There we go. All right, so that was quick. That's what we expect. And with super minimal code, if we take a look at the output here, we can see some default help and our options. So out of the box, with the sort of default invoke, we get good help generation. We actually get tab completion support. We get a version command and we get help, like zero effort. So if I come back in here and say .NET Run, version. This is 1.0.0 because the assembly version of my app is 1.0.0. But, you can adjust that in any way. You can set your MS build properties and say this is version 100 dot the best, which is totally a valid version, right? And I think I may have actually, it doesn't like it.
I think the informational version you can do this. I think for the regular version it has to be a actually valid version number.
Yeah, so there. I can use all of the normal ways of setting versions in my application, and out of the box you get support for that.
So to be
This is
clear,
really
like
nice.
version is a built-in thing that you get for free with System Command. You didn't have to set up a command or option for dash dash version.
Same for help. So what's happening when you invoke a command out of the thanks, Shreyas. What's happening when you invoke a command like right out of the box is we have sort of a default set of what we consider best practices. And use defaults. I think it may be a static. But out of the box, we use those defaults for you. And that includes help. That includes version. That includes registering with tab completion. And that includes parse error handling as well. So let's say I come in here and I type that option incorrectly. I get nice error output specifically for that. And I didn't have to do anything.
Oh, you also give like typo correction? You're saying, oh, did you mean dash dash version?
Yeah, typo correction too. It's pretty great. And, right now we just have a very simple Boolean argument, right? But let's do something a little bit more interesting. Let's say var iterations equals new option. Actually, let's show an argument, right? And so we'll make an int argument here. We'll call this iterations, and we'll say the number of times to run or to say the thing. And then we'll do a very naive, for each or for var I in. I'm going to do all the allocations just to irk you.
I was about to say. I don't know how you deal with Copilot in the background. Like I find this slightly jarring.
I love it. So I'm used to having a conversation with my compiler anyway, and that's just one more voice, I need that there and that there. Okay. So now if we go to another help here, we should see a couple things happening here. We see our new argument in the correct position. We see the argument name I specified, the documentation I wrote for it in line. And now if we actually run the thing, we'll say 10, or, we'll be a little bit more circumspect here and say 3. And yeah, so pretty simple to hook things up and pretty simple to get a lot of the sort of ancillary benefits. Like it's really easy oftentimes in command line application libraries to parse a value, to get that value and then go do a thing. It becomes more difficult when you want to do typo correction or input validation or help or tab completion and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so there are a few questions here. So one of them was like, okay, we already have version predefined. Can you manually define version?
You absolutely can. So in the default, so we're taking a shortcut here. We're saying command.invoke or command.invoke async in a more complex application. So the .NET CLI does not do this. Instead, what it uses is there's a structure called, it's like something builder. Oh yeah, command line builder. And it has a use defaults on it. Where is the defaults? I think you may just get the defaults by default, as they might suggest. But it includes a couple middlewares. So if you're familiar with like the ASP.NET Core middleware concept, there's something very similar going on here. And in that default pipeline includes, like we said, typo correction, parse validation, parse error reporting, help, and the version thing. And all the version thing looks like is var version. Like that, right? And then a piece of middleware that looks something very similar to get value for option version, or rather it's this. Yeah, sure, we'll get value for option version, right? So if this is non-null, that means the user supplied version, and then we do something different here, right? So we would go fetch that version, output it, and then short circuit. So the middleware sort of concept that takes the sort of execution context and lets you decide where to do with it is a super powerful building block that you have access to in System Command Line. And it's sort of your entry point for cross-cutting functionality like version, like help reporting, like tracing, like if you wanted a -- debug flag to let a user attach a debugger when they start up your application, that's another perfect place to put it, because then it doesn't pollute your application code. It just lives in a single piece of middleware and then gets out of the way.
And so then the idea is that it would be available to all commands, not just the one you defined here, right? Because you can define multiple commands like git or .NET itself, right?
Absolutely. Let's do an experiment with that. What a great segue. So let's see. If we've got some verbose output here, sorry, I'm skimming the chat here. Looks like some people don't like my autocomplete suggestions. Sorry, folks. In fact, I'll just deactivate Copilot for now. So let's add a subcommand. Let's make greet, right? So var. All right, so here's our command by default. And then greet is going to have its own kind of option here. Let's say this is enthusiasm. I can spell, folks. And we'll do a similar thing here. The amount of joy you feel. So then we'll say that greet has this option. And then we'll say that when greet is invoked, we are going to we're going to have enthusiasm be the number of exclamation points on this message, right? So let's see. We'll go var points equals string.
It's just new string, yeah.
Yeah, and then I can do the bang character that many times, right?
Yep. That's
okay, sweet. And we'll be super fancy, and we'll just interpolate into that because we are super fancy folks here. And boom, we have our subcommand with just a little bit of horrible typing on my part. So now if we do help again, we should see our, oh, you know what I didn't do? I didn't add greet to our parent command. So if you notice, we have arguments and we have options, but we have no command. So let's try it one more time. And now we have commands in there.
Does the order matter?
Does the order of adding the commands?
Yeah, because you
Or just
added
adding all
verbose
the pieces?
iterations and then greet. Could I add greet between verbose and iterations? Would that make a difference?
It would not make a difference. We group these things by
Kind, I guess.
by kind. Yeah, exactly. Within each section, I believe you get an alpha sort by default, but there's, everything you see in help, while you get what we think are sane defaults, there's this concept called help builder that you can override and subclass and take this part of that you like and this part that you don't. In fact, a very brief example of that is the usage here. This usage section works great for commands that really only have one execution form, like they're very linear. But it's very often to have commands that operate in different ways depending on how they're invoked. And so if we look at .NET New, there's actually 2 ways to invoke .NET New. And one of those is creating a template where you specify the template's name and the template arguments. But the other one is actually to invoke subcommands off of .NET New. What are those subcommands? Well, they're things like install, uninstall, update, search, and list. So this capability to have the different usages isn't something that's in box right now in System.CommandLine, but due to the ability to sort of extract and customize individual help sections, the .NET templating team could make that happen with only a little bit of effort. So the
You say could
extensibility of
because they're
this.
not using System Command Line for .NET
Oh
New?
no, they are. They were enabled to do that easily because it was very easy to use all of this the same and just override this part. So the .NET templating team, I got to brag on my team a little bit. They've been on sort of the bleeding edge of driving the direction of this library. One of the big things we're proud of for .NET 7 is this really complex and powerful tab completion that I showed off earlier. And that's all powered by new dynamic, like on-demand completion features that my team pushed for. So I'm really happy with
So
their
let's talk
efforts.
about autocomplete for a second because there's some
Oh
questions
yeah.
in chat with respect to this. So one of them is, so what happens with autocomplete? Does it actually run the application or is there some reflection going on?
Oh, this is a great question, and I'm so glad you asked. It actually runs your application. So the .NET CLI is a bit of an exception, so we'll just throw that out the window for now and talk about this application. There is another tool called .NET Suggest, and it interacts with the completion that you define in your application to provide tab completion. So we talked a little bit about the default pipeline that you get for free out of System.CommandLine. Part of that involves a tab completion handler. And the way that that is implemented is as a separate directive. So System.CommandLine provides this concept of a directive. And a directive call looks something like this. Right? And then you have your actual command. And so what a directive is a cross-cutting piece of functionality in a syntax like this that there's a piece of middleware that knows to look for and parses that out and does suggestions instead. So what's happening behind the scenes is your full command, .NET actual command, or migrate command times 10, is parsed, and then that parse result has a member on it called get completions. And all that does is go through each of the commands and options and arguments that you've defined on your command and ask them how to complete themselves. For some types of options and arguments, like Booleans, for example, it's super straightforward what completion should be for those. But for more complex ones, like a string, which is just wide open, there is no tab completion by default. It becomes very easy, though, to define and override your own. So let's look at what that looks like. So we have this iterations argument here. What if we wanted to sort of prompt the user for a reasonable set of completions? So we can very easily add completions in a few different ways. If we look at some of the overloads, you can provide raw values, or you can provide on-demand computed values. And so I'm going to go with the easy way right now, and I'm going to do something like...
That escalated quickly.
I did. Arbitrary no exceptions. So I'm just going to come in here and do a very simple 1, 2, 3, right? And I have successfully provided completions for iterations now by doing that. You can do many more complex things. In fact, if you check the docs for System Command Line, one of the worked examples in there is a way of dynamically providing the next 2 weeks of date times, like on a daily basis, in this completion handler here. So there was like I think the example is a scheduling application, like a calendar application. And the use case is, hey, make a new meeting, schedule it on this day, and the completions handler for the date parameter there just scaffolds out the next 2 weeks from the current day, right? So you can go really complex with this. The most complex version is that third one. I just lost my signature help, so we get to retype it. So yeah, this is the most complex kind here. This is a completion delegate, and what that looks like is a completion context that you return some completion items out of. And what is a completion item? Completion items are where things get really fun. There we go. Completion items are every single thing you see here in my tab completion was a completion item. Now, you can just do normal strings, but sometimes your sorting isn't a sort of natural lexical sort, right? So if you provide a completion item, you can provide the sort text that will be used to sort on, you can provide inline documentation, and one of the enhancements we want to do for a future version of .NET Suggest is to actually make it where the documentation for these things that you tab completing on appears in line. So if we go back to the Blazor server example I had before, and specifically the auth parameter, there's these different authentication types here. And these are defined in the template for Blazor server. And if I'm a new user coming to Blazor server for the first time, I don't know what any of these mean. Maybe there's something that the template author could provide to tell me what they are. And it turns out there is.
I'm an existing user. I don't know what that means either.
Well, I mean, sometimes, yeah. So the point is surface all of this information that's already in the template in line with the user. Each and every one of these actually already has a template description that we could flow through the user with a little bit more work, and we're going to get there. But so the upshot of this is, as an end user, if you want the maximum control over your completions, this library gives it to you. It lets you do almost arbitrary calculations to give the most relevant completions to your user on a parameter by parameter basis, on an argument by argument basis, and even at the command level.
So that makes sense. I guess one of the examples that I have in mind is .NET add package, right, where we basically autocomplete the available set of NuGet packages, and clearly we don't want to pre-populate that list with the 250,000 or so package IDs that exist on NuGet.org. So I guess the context would give you what the user has already typed, and then the idea would be you would just fetch the next 10 items that have the same prefix, right?
That's exactly it. So I did Newtonsoft and I did f#.da here, and you can see that in both cases, the set of packages we returned were filtered by the stem that I provided. When you are defining your own custom completion delegate, I apologize in advance, folks. You can also just provide nothing, and it will give you, like, I believe by default it sorts by top downloads or something, right?
Right.
But we were able to define that completion delegate to do whatever we wanted, and you can too.
The warning you just got with display all 116 items, I guess that is your special formatting thingy you have, right?
This is actually coming from PowerShell. So we returned all 116 already from the system command line suggest handler, and now my shell has taken over and is giving me, the end user, the option of how I want those displayed.
Yeah, that's what I meant. So that's not specific to system command, and that's just how your shell is set up to render completions, basically.
Exactly. And so you touch on sort of a good point here. We can give you all the tools in the world in the library, but without good integrations to the user's shell, all of that effort gets dropped by the wayside. And so as part of the GA of System of Command Line, and even the betas, I should say, we've documented what you as an end user have to do to customize your setup, or to get .NET Suggest hooked up into your setup so that these tab completions work. It is more painful than we'd like right now. You have to download a script and you have to put it in your shell's profile. It doesn't necessarily travel with you machine to machine. And this is an area that we want to make a lot easier. But the best thing you can do as a tool author is provide those rich completions now, so that when we light up that functionality, you're already good to go.
Yeah, this is awesome. So one of the questions was this one here. I suppose application shouldn't be too slow to start for tab completion to be nice. I mean, yes, I think that's generally true. But I mean, one thing that is also key to point out here is when you look at the sample code that you wrote earlier, where you basically define the options, then you have a handler. There's a strong separation between defining what your syntax is and what shape it has, and the actual logic that when the code runs, right? Because clearly when we provide tab completion for, format C, right, we don't want to actually execute the formatting. We just want to tell you what options formatting C would have, right? So there is clearly a difference here. But like, I mean, you get that for free basically, because the API shape kind of forces you to have them separated out. You can't do them at the same time anyway.
So this performance question is actually kind of central to why this library was created in the first place. There are tons of command line parsing and handling libraries out there, but there wasn't one that natively, from the beginning, was friendly to trimming. And trimming is a prerequisite for fast startup, in my opinion. There's also AOT compilation. There's also PGO guided JIT. Like, there's all these other components, but code that you don't carry with you is code that doesn't have to be JITted, right? So we wanted a library that was trim friendly from the get-go and could be a foundation for more rich, not quite as verbose, shall we say, experiences on top of it.
Yeah, so then that's a nice segue to the next. The other question we got is, so can we publish the tool as native AOT console app? And the answer is yes, right?
It depends on what tool means here. So if you're meaning .NET tools, I don't think so. But .NET tools and what we're writing here are separate concepts. If you're talking about like the tool that we just made in the stream together, this program CS, yeah, totally can.
Yeah, I think so basically global tools, right? Like the thing that is published to NuGet.org, where we have .NET Tool install and .NET Tool update. That one only supports framework dependent apps, right? It doesn't do, but you could do framework dependent single file, can you not?
Yep. Framework dependent should work. There is future work that we want to do for .NET tools specifically, like, again, not related to system command line, to make them more trim friendly, more native friendly, and all of these things. But that'll be just part of our sort of evolving .NET is better and great at native applications story, right? I see.
Another question that I think is common is this one here: is the decorator attribute-based declarative way of defining commands?
Yeah, this is a great question and touches on some of the design decisions of the library as well. So in the core library, the thing that we are working towards GA with, the thing that we have documented, no, it's all sort of manual hookups like you've seen me code live here right now. There's some amount of like code sharing you can do. The library is very heavily built on like a builder pattern. So if you have like good extension methods sort of shortcuts for doing common things, it becomes very easy and not quite as verbose to do what we've done here. But our solution for decorator and attribute-based declarative command definition is going to be use this as a library, or like use this as your core layer, and then have a nicer translation layer on top. So I can speak to a couple efforts in this space that are happening right now that you should keep an eye out for. The first one is there is a source generator that members of the team are working on right now, where you just define your commands as normal functions, like static functions that take parameters. They have XML documentation comments. They have attributes for parameter names. They have attributes for descriptions, all these things. And you take these very simple functions, very clean, and you just hook them up to a tree structure, and all of the things that we wrote here get generated for you at compile time, and you're done. So that is a very sort of lightweight, like low mental overhead pathway. The second one is you may be familiar with the docopt project or the docopt concept of creating a library or a CLI application. For those that don't, docopt is big in the Python space, and the approach there is you write your help output. You write this, and you have your command syntax, you have your description, you have your arguments, you have your options, examples, everything as a raw string in your program, and then something takes that string and sort of interprets it and then generates your command handler on the back end. So the DocOp team has been working on a source generator as well, and I believe they have actually implemented their source generator, but they've been in contact with us, and we've been talking about the possibility of using System Command Line as the thing that their source generator generates, because it's such a solid foundation. So that's sort of the philosophy we want to have. We want to have like the manual transmission, sports car at the bottom. And then we want you to be able to bring in your 6-speed automatic with the sweet entertainment system and the like Harman Kardon speakers, right? So we don't want using this library to prevent you from doing anything.
Yeah, in our experience, it's also the typical problem. If you look at ASP.NET, for example, every single release we ship, there's a different opinion on how your main should look like, right? And so, the high level, I guess, syntax and syntactic sugar that we provide to make common things easier, that will likely change over time, right? But I think the problem is if in the typical Microsoft attitude in the past was always we work backwards from the stage demo, right? We say, okay, what demo do we want to do? And then we build the building blocks that make that happen. But then that usually results in us just sipping this syntactic sugar as basically the one button that does what the stage demo required. But then if you need something more than the stage demo, then you're basically screwed. And so this is more like the inverse of that, right? We are basically building this from the ground up, from first principles, and then make sure that the building blocks are there. And yeah, that might not be the tersest thing in V1, but anything you can do with it, you can do with it, right? Without reinventing the wheel. I think that's
and we think the value prop is there. We think it's fast. We think out of the box, what you get is a good balance of verbosity and capability. And I'm excited. Like, I think a huge missing space in .NET applications is rich support for completions across CLI applications. Go beats us at this. Python beats us at this. There's no reason why we can't have strong offerings here and consistent offerings across our whole ecosystem. And I want to push like for this shared low level, do the hard part layer, and let this like garden of 1,000 different approaches to the binding side of things bloom. So, and I completely agree that it's the first principles approach here. The folks that have been working on this have been in the CLI space for years now, trying to like distill these concepts down to the core. Like, what is an argument? What is an option? How do they relate to each other? How do you parse them in an efficient way, and most importantly, a consistent way, right? So we're hoping to do all of those annoying pieces and then just give you a tool set to make all the cool applications you want without tons of overhead on your part, and you end up with an application that feels native and works consistently and has beautiful output. So I'm mildly passionate about these things.
No, I think that's, I mean, I've joked about this before, right? That we, with .NET Core, we basically said like, hey, let's make cross-platform easier, right? But then, our user experience that we deliver in the .NET SDK is basically a console app is you have a bunch of string arcs and then, a pat on the back and good luck, right? So now we actually give you something that allows you to parse those, strings into something that is actually meaningful.
Yeah. It's like for the .NET CLI specifically, this base does so much for us and it lifts so much of the hard parts away. Right now,
Right.
we don't have amazing tab completion everywhere in the CLI, but now it becomes a very easy task to identify, oh, this particular option, we don't have great completions for it. Okay, I'll write a single delegate that gives us the best completions in the world for this option, and all of the hooking up, all of the machinery is taken care of for me there. So I think somebody mentioned in the past file completions, and that is currently a bit of a gap. We do have support for it. We bind, or we support binding all sorts of the sort of base file system types that you might expect, right? So file info, directory info, and I think file system info, which is the base class of them. And there are extension methods on them for validators. That's one thing we didn't touch on, but there is deep support for adding custom validators for your options and arguments, right? But for file names and directories and that sort of thing, we bundle some because it's so prevalent. The completion side of things is less out of the box fleshed out, but there's nothing stopping you here from doing something like, well, in the context I got this stem, like I got this word I need to complete. Well, let me do a file dot list all, or whatever it is, directory info dot get files with this as a stem, So it is very easy to do that sort of thing, and that kind of targeted improvement is what I'm looking forward to bringing to the .NET CLI specifically.
Yeah, so one question is, so how does this play with dependency injection? I guess that's more like the dependency injection for the context of ASP.NET, right, where we have configuration, we have DI, we have services, right, this whole thing. And this is kind of related to that or not?
So there's sort of two parallels. There's two ways dependency injection can play into this. Immo, like you mentioned, you can provide dependencies. You can provide classes or structure or whatever units of functionality in the pipeline. There's a thing called the binding context that you can get access to in your handler, and you can try and sort of locate dependencies out of that if you want. But I think what most people are thinking of is integration with Microsoft.extensions.dependency injection, right? And there is actually an example of that in the repo. I believe it's the System.CommandLine.host project. But what it does, or what it tries to do, is bridge the binding source or the binding context concept in System Command Line with the iService provider concept in Microsoft extensions. So one thing to be aware of, though, one of the downsides to Microsoft.extensions.dependency injection, specifically in like ASP.NET Core apps, is there's a lot of wiring that typically happens, right? And that can be computationally expensive. What you should be thinking of when you're working with a command line application is doing the minimal amount of work possible, right? So everything we've done here, it's only definitions. And you don't actually do any work until you call the handler for the command that you are executing. So you can try and bridge. Yeah, that's it exactly.
This is a sample that looks a bit like an ASP.NET project, right? Where you have the command line, you have the host builder, and then here's where you configure your services, and then this is basically where you build the command line. And then,
and there's your handler.
and I suppose this is already pre-parsing all the options into some strongly typed thingy.
Yep. So in this case, they've injected the iHost, and they're doing manual binding there. Now, line 36 in this example, this is where we expect tons and tons and tons of people to have their own opinions, to have their own ways of extracting out parameters or grabbing things from the environment. We want this to be a space where anyone can experiment. And so the handler property you see on this line of code is actually an interface. And so you can define your own custom implementations of that interface that do binding in any way you want. You will get access to the same exact structures and the same exact data that the set handler that I was using in my demo does, right? So you can go hog wild there. So you don't necessarily have to do all of the calls on lines 43 and 44 here that are explicitly grabbing those dependencies from the service provider. If you want to do a reflection-based, hey, this run member has these parameters, I'm just going to dynamically resolve them from my DI container, you can absolutely do that. And in fact, we have something very similar to that in the repo as well, in the form of System.CommandLine naming convention binder. So we sort of advertise a number of different approaches to handling this binding between a handler function and the parameters and options that were actually supplied. But it really all comes down to a func of parse result to actual function being called. So it's a wide open space for many people's opinions to experiment in.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so this is another question here. Does it help with configuration or configuring default values for unspecified arguments, something similar to git config?
Yep, absolutely does. Let's take enthusiasm for an example. This is an option of an int. And if you don't supply it, the default value here will be 0. And that's because depending on the type that you specify for the option, we can infer a sane default or a not sane default. And so you could model this a little bit more explicitly and do something like this to make it a nullable int, which would mean that enthusiasm is not required. So in this case, the default value of enthusiasm will be null, or rather like the empty nullable struct, right? You can override that. You could come back to this int and say that, okay, which overload do I want? I want get default value. I want the default enthusiasm to be 11. And that's for all you Spinal Tap fans out there. There we go. And so now, if I don't specify an enthusiasm, the enthusiasm will be 11. And if I run this command, which I believe is greet, we should get 11 exclamation points here. Except I am bad at typing. So now we should get 11. We didn't. Oh my goodness. Okay, so I've clearly done something incorrect there. The other thing that you can do is a parse argument delegate of this is where things get really custom, right? So you can define your own parsing delegate for the parameter or for the tokens that are passed in. And so in my case, I could say something like tokens switch.
You're missing a closing brace, a closing parenthesis after the.
Right there.
Yeah, I think so. No, you have one too much probably. Yeah, something like that.
I may also just need to type this so that the inference can work. Yeah, okay, so this will fix itself here in a second. So we could do something like length 0. My syntax is all garbage here, isn't it, Immo? Oh, it's because it's an I read-only list. There you go. So if the count is 0, then we'll default to 11 in this case. Say return. And in every other case, we will take r.tokens, we'll take the head, and we will just int.parse this thing. So this is a very loosey-goosey argument parser.
If you want to replace the open close of, yeah, exactly.
There you go. So this is a very loosey-goosey argument parser, but hopefully you can begin to see some of the power here. You will get the full set of tokens that the parser has parsed for this argument, and you can do arbitrary levels of parsing here. Still didn't do it. All right, great demo. Suffice to say, so this may be on an old beta where this has been fixed or something. I normally run the nightly feeds from the URL on the system command line repo. So we can go double check it there after this. So suffice to say, there are plenty of mechanisms for supplying default values and doing your own custom parsing of the textual tokens coming in. And we actually do this in the .NET CLI fairly often. The benefit of pushing these things into parse handlers and into validators and into defaults and that sort of thing is that you see them reflected in help as well. So if you have default values specified for arguments, you will see them pop up in here. So if I go back to my get default value here, it really did not like that. Immo, oh, it's that closing. There you go. So if we go back to that and we do this again, we should see, yep, the default populates, right? So it's just those little niceties. Everywhere you provide information, we try and surface that information in the user-facing parts of the app.
Yeah, the user clarified, I think he was referring to, do you support some sort of auto configuration where if you put the right information in user profile, every time you invoke the command, it will also read them from there. So you don't have to specify them and don't rely on whatever the defaults for the program happens to be.
Yep, that makes sense. We do not out of the box. This is something I am intensely interested in, though. For years now on the SDK and CLI team, we've thought about having some sort of CLI level configuration file for just this sort of thing as well, right? Common option would be in there might be like a common default verbosity that you want, right? Or aliases for particular .NET CLI commands that you use very often, much in the same way that Git allows you to specify your own aliases, right? Nothing like that is built in. There are a bunch of different ways where you could handle that, though. If you wanted to implement something like that yourself right now, one of the easiest extension points I could think of would be in the parse argument delegate for that particular option, because you could look at the tokens that came in for the option. So enthusiasm, say, if there were no tokens that were passed, then look for an environment value of, what did I call this application? I called it my app, I think. Oh, it's called Standup. Yeah. So in my case, I could look for a standup underscore enthusiasm environment variable, or I could look in the user's home directory in a .standup directory for a config file, etc. So you get all of the options in through that parse argument delegate. And that would be where I'd look to hook that sort of thing up. So kicking the can a little bit, but everything is possible. It does support double dash. I'm so glad you asked. This, Gaurav, you are an educated CLI user. This is super tricky, but we support it 100% out of the box. If you...
Can you explain what it does?
Yes. It's very confusing what it does. The most common place you may have seen it is right now. I've been using it this entire time. And the reason I've been using it this entire time is because this command line is ambiguous. The runner, the argument parser for the .NET run command is going to go through this and it's going to say, okay, .NET run, I was given an argument of greet and oh, my help option was triggered. And if we do this, we see the help for .NET run. That's not what I specified. That's not what I meant as the user. And so what you can use the double dash for is to signal to the consuming application that everything after this dash is meant to be parsed as an argument. It's not an option, it's not a subcommand. Everything after this is an argument. And so if we do this, then what happens is .NET Run looks at that same command and says, okay, .NET Run, and I've got these loose arguments. Okay, well, the user didn't specify a project to run, so, oh, okay, I'm in a project directory. Clearly, they want me to run that. So let me go execute that project and pass along the arguments that I got, right? So it is a way to disambiguate in ambiguous situations. As a user, what this ends up looking like when you want to use it is you make a new argument of your own. Let's just say list of string here. All right, so you would just make an argument to hold these things, add it to your grammar, extra args like that, and we'll come in here and say list string extras. And then after we've done all this stuff, we will, for each I know I'm doing this horrifically. All right, and then we'll make sure and not forget to pass in our option here. So if we run our actual help one more time, we'll see our extra args pop up in there. It looks like I did the ordering slightly wrong. Ordering matters for arguments. All right, so now if we look at our ordering, we'll see iterations and then optional extra args. And if we come in here and say 10 here, and then A, B, C, then we had a super fun, not exactly, oh, that's why. Parse A, oh, I see. Iterations, which we did, extra args. I may have an ambiguous grammar here.
I think your problem might be that you're basically having now two double dashes, right? One for .NET Run.
Yeah. Let's do this then.
I was about to say just run the exe directly.
Yeah. Oh, I'm on Windows. Does it show?
You need to do /.
Okay, well, I've still clearly not done something right. Oh, is it because I'm calling greet? No, that's fine. Oh, it is because I'm calling greet. I'm silly. I forgot our base command is the one that actually does the thing. There. Yeah. So once I get the syntax right, we can see the 10 normal outputs and it collected the extra args here, right? So a little bit of work, but this makes it really unambiguous. Where are the parts that are going somewhere else, right? So if I needed to invoke another application, I'm just gonna kill greet because it's getting in the way. If I needed to forward these args to some other application, I have them just all in one place. There's no ambiguity at this point. So
That is awesome.
yeah, it's one of the hairier parts. So one of the complex things that people don't necessarily understand when they start writing a CLI app is the different ways that options can be specified, the different ways that arguments can be parsed, the implications of POSIX unbundling. Yeah, it's a lot. And so this parser handles all of the POSIX options. It handles all of the different ways of specifying options and flags. So single dashes, double dashes, you can specify that. Slashes, you got it. Question marks, it's weird, but I suppose you could do it. So
Yeah, so I think we are now kind of at time now. It's like we're already 50 minutes over, but it's a good discussion. So I think this is the primary link we want people to know, that is going to the GitHub repo for System.CommandLine. There's some discussion of moving the repo or merging it with other repos, but that's the place that it has right now. And so if we were to change the repo location, that's also where we would announce where the new location is. So it's a good place to go to. It's basically .NET/system.commandline, but these AKMS links are a bit easier to remember. Another thing that people may want to be aware of, that there is a lot of syntactic conventions for CLIs. So what we have implemented here is more or less what POSIX recommends, right? So there is a certain syntax expectation for POSIX with dash and double dashes and commands and options and how they are bundled and all that stuff. Like if you ever used Git on the command line, you're probably aware of what those are. Some people find them confusing, but for better or worse, those are the conventions that most command line tools follow. I work on API design guidelines, and I'm a big believer in consistency, because even if you don't like something, once you learned it and it's everywhere the same, it's still beneficial to people. And so there is, I think, a really nice website that does a great job of like going over all the the history of command lines, and has a nice write-up on what the conventions are. I think you do yourself a favor reading it, no matter if you're building command line apps or not. You're probably using command line apps, so just understanding that is probably also quite beneficial.
Oh yeah. There were a couple last things, like not necessarily directly related to what we were doing, but that came up in the chat that I want to hit real quick. Victor Borges asked, can we call handlers asynchronously? Yes, absolutely. I've just been using invoke here, but you can use invoke async. And if you do that, a cancellation token is part of that same default pipeline. So you can have a cancellation token parameter for your handler function, check it for cancellation, actually canceled, just like you would in any other purely asynchronous context. Tetley asked how I get the errors to show up in my IDE window. That is a VS Code extension called Error Lens, I think. Yes, it's called Error Lens, and all it does is take the same errors, warnings, and outputs there and just highlight the line with it, right? And then there was one more question from, I'm going to butcher this, Foolish Snable, about fun stuff in F#. I see you. You're my favorite. Go check out f#.system.commandline from a user named Jordan Marr. He's been building a sleek computation syntax expression syntax on top of all of the things that we worked with today.
I heard all the words you just said. I don't know what any of them mean. Anything else you want to plug?
Anything else I want to plug? Yeah, so the System Command Line repo itself, the project is super fun. There's a lot of stuff going on in there that we would like to get to, but may not have the time to for GA. So if you are a person who is passionate about command lines and you have a pet feature that you think would be huge, open issue, have a discussion. Me and John Segura are there. Kathleen Dollard is also there. A couple really strong community members like Kevin are there. His name, his GitHub username is like Kibu or something like that. Anyway, a bunch of really invested community members are there, and we all want to make this thing great, and you could be a part of that, and we want you to be part of that. Other fun things coming in the future that we want to get to, not just dynamic completion, but shell-specific pre-generated completion. So you may be familiar with like Zeesh and Oil Shell have this really complex static completion configuration. We want to integrate with that. We want that to be generated so that you don't even necessarily have to launch your app, and so your users can have even faster completions. That's a thing we want. The .NET SDK, where the .NET CLI is, we would love feedback on that. We would love suggestions for where completion could be better, where judicious use of color or formatting changes would make things clearer for you. Please come to that repo. It's github.com/.net/SDK. We would love to have those conversations with you.
Awesome. Then I think we can call it a day. Like the only question I have, which I forgot to ask, is like I will poke you after the meeting. Like I want to add some examples to my help page, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. So we should talk about that.
All right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Everybody else, like, yeah, please let us know what you think. I mean, I've seen some people like the command line experience, and so if you want us to change some direction, now is your time, because once we shipped it, it's very hard for us to change fundamentals. We can, of course, add more stuff on top, but renaming is very difficult. So now is your time to let us know when you don't like certain names or certain core parts of it. All right, then I would say thanks, everyone. And then I hope I see you in, 4 weeks from now or something like that?
All right. Thanks, everybody. This was a very fun time.
And thanks for filling in on short notice.